Here we have the Columbia River Knife and Tool Company's CEO. This is the original, and this is the flipper. Um, I'm going to be doing a compare and contrast video today on these two knives. This is probably my favorite knife out of my personal collection, and I'm going to be explaining which one I think is better and why, because I don't think there's a fair video out there for consumers to look at. But first, I'm going to take a look at the original and tell you why I love it so much. The issue for me on pocket knives has been that a lot of knife makers have failed, I feel, to understand their market and their audience. Sure, there are a lot of men out there who work on farms or industrial settings who can really use a big, thick, heavy, meat cutting pocket knife. And I'm sure they love those knives, and I'm sure they sell many of those knives. But I think what a lot of these companies are struggling with is that there is a new man out there, a modern man, someone like me, who goes to work in a different sort of field. I work in healthcare, actually, um, and needs a knife for the office, for the everyday, for cutting open boxes and digging staples out of stacks of paper. Um, I cannot deny that my life is a lot easier with a knife. I love carrying a pocket knife. It is one of the most useful tools that I own. But those big, scary looking pocket knives that they're marketing to men as this sort of rugged, outdoor, masculine tool, I just don't need that. And I think a lot of men don't need that. And I think that these companies need to do a better job of producing options like this. And I think that's why this knife has sold so well for so many people. Um, First off, I want to say that a lot of people seem to think that this knife is a glorified letter opener. It's definitely not the heaviest knife out there, but actually the geometry to this blade is very interesting. The thicker part of the spine is actually quite hefty. This is not my first CEO blade. This is actually my second one, and it's not as long as your typical CEO because I've sharpened the blade a couple times throughout having it. They are definitely a bit heftier than most people give them credit for. They're a little bit more solid, and I think a lot of it actually has to do not only with the interesting blade geometry, but also the fact that the handle is actually very well solid, and the locking mechanism and the this piece right here is very solid and it's well built. You kind of just get a quality feel. And above all that, the knife is fun to play with. It deploys faster than any other knife I have. I would even argue that this ball bearing kind of system deploys faster than an automatic knife that I have. So I love that. That said, there are definitely some downsides, some complaints that owners of this knife or reviewers of this knife have had, and I'm going to go over those here in a second. But first, I want to show you in comparison. This is a good old fashioned Lamy fountain pen. Um, it's not quite the length of a fountain pen, and I think that's because it has a deep carry pocket clip, and it's really designed to disappear in a shirt pocket. Which it is just about the length, if not just a little bit shorter than the average shirt pocket. So it's not quite as long as a pen. I wish it was as long as a pen, but it's not quite. I liked this knife so much that I actually went out and purchased several other variants, including this bamboo version right here. I went out and purchased this burgundy colored version. I like this one quite a bit. It has a black blade. And this is the special, I think it's SVR8, something like that, steel version in blue, Superman blue. Some people say denim jean blue. I actually really think it's supposed to be Superman, which would make more sense when you think about it. It has definitely a very smooth opening compared to the others. I will say that. At the end of the day, this is my everyday carry, though. This original black CEO. I love it. It's perfect for me. But there are definitely some complaints. The first one has to do with this clip. This clip can be a little stabby. Because of the milling, even though this is a beautiful design, this part right here, these holes, are a weak spot in the structure. So if you clip this to your hip and in your pocket, and this clip catches on something, it can bend right here and it can snap this clip. And this clip is actually an integral part of the knife, which we'll get to here in a second. The other issue, it's not an ambidextrous knife. It's definitely a right-handed only knife. Um, there's no way to switch it around. And the other issue is because of where this clip is, this is a tip down carry knife. So what I mean by that is when you go to put it in the pocket, because the clip is there, the blade is pointing down. And the problem with that is, if you're not a knife aficionado, a lot of people who love knives, collect knives, carry knives, don't love knives that are designed like this. It's pretty rare anymore that you even find knives like this, because there's a risk that you could stab yourself when trying to put this into your pocket if it catches on something and opens a little bit. I'm going to explain why I don't have that problem and why I don't think that's really a problem for anyone who owns this knife, though. So this is an example of a standard pocket knife. There's typically a thumb stud or some other feature where the blade is at the very least protruding out from the knife. And then there's another feature like this trigger, which allows you to deploy the knife, or a flipper tab. The clip is placed at the other end so that when you go to put this in your pocket, should the knife be ever so slightly open, as you put it into your bucket, it's going to close instead of stab you. Here's the thing, though. The only reason that's an issue is because there are parts, like I said, protruding from the knife, like a flipper tab or like a thumb stud, that it could potentially catch on, which would open the knife and in turn put you at risk for accidentally stabbing yourself. The reason that I don't think that is an issue for the CEO is because none of that really exists. This knife disappears into the handle. It is perfectly flush. It's actually a little deeper than flush. A lot of people have actually complained about this thumb stud. Not sure if you can see it, but it's not very big. There are ridges, and those ridges are designed so that if it catches on a piece of fabric, it's going to slide over the thumb stud and not hit the thumb stud. It's actually one of the biggest complaints amongst reviewers of this knife, because it's difficult to really press into that thumb stud. Once you get it, it's not a big deal, but it's difficult to learn. There's a learning curve to it. But what I'm getting at here is it is extremely unlikely that this blade, compared to a traditional pocket knife, is ever going to catch, and that the, let's see if I can do it without, nope, okay. It's unlikely that this situation right here is ever going to occur. It's very difficult to get it to deploy to begin with. That sort of effort you have to build into getting the knife to fling open is necessary for that flipping action. So it's difficult to open. There's nothing really to snag on once it's closed. I just don't think that a tip down carry is really an issue with the CEO, but that's my opinion. The other reason that I don't think it's an issue is that this clip serves a vital function. It's not just decorative. Okay, this is a very sort of thin, stick-like blade. The clip right here serves the function of a guard, more or less, or something that prevents your hand from slipping. Honestly, if it weren't for this right here, I don't know that I'd feel very comfortable with this blade, because it could just fall straight through your hands and you could cut yourself. So I like where this clip is. I don't see a problem with it, and I do believe it is integral to the function of the knife. So with all that being said, here is our CEO flipper. This knife was great in that the company actually listened to reviewers and customers, and sort of went back and fixed all the things that people didn't like. No more jabby pocket clip. It's now located at the other end. The pocket clip can be switched from this side to this side. So if you're ambidextrous, that's not a problem. There's a flipper tab instead of a thumb stud. So again, if you're ambidextrous, it's not a problem. There is an ever so slightly wider bit here on the, what do you call that? The frame lock, liner lock, so that it's easier to push the knife back in and to disengage that liner lock. So let's take a look at it. It does spring open fairly quickly, but I want you to see something else. Okay, the traditional CEO flings open with no problem. This one, depending on how you're holding the knife, it's not ever going to be as fast or as clicky as the traditional CEO. You're never going to get that same feeling of snapping it open with this knife that you would get on the traditional CEO. A lot of times I find myself having to do that where I have to flick up in order to make this work for me. The best way I found to get it to go full round is to hold the knife actually down like this when I'm trying to get it to deploy it and let gravity assist me so it opens all the way. But it does not have that same snappy feeling on the traditional, and I don't exactly love that. The other thing, as I mentioned, that awkward pocket clip is actually an integral part of this knife. This knife is not only lacking that clip that prevents my hand from slipping, but it is actually rounded. I believe that the way the company tried to make up for that was by giving it a textured feel, so there's a little bit more grippiness to the scales. But overall, this knife definitely feels like it's going to slip through your fingers and you're going to end up cutting yourself. So I liked that clip where it was. Honestly, I don't really care for this. The other issue is you might think that blade looks a little bit thinner and smaller than the other knife. I thought that too, and at first I thought I was going crazy. Turns out it's not that crazy. This knife, even being sharpened a couple times, is still a hair longer, larger, and wider than this blade. And at first I thought that can't be the case. Then I looked at the specs, and it's true. You know, people said that this original CEO blade was a glorified letter opener. That isn't really true, but I'm telling you, with this flipper right here, this is a glorified letter opener. It's beautiful. I'm happy that the company listened to consumers and updated it. The finish on the blade is very nice, but it does not feel as sturdy. When you pick it up, there's not as much heft, so you know that there's some metal missing somewhere along the way. And when you look at the back of it, that's what really got me. The thing that is securing this blade in place, if you can see it, it's very difficult to see, is two little pegs. Essentially, that's what they are. They're little pegs. And those pegs lock into place there. Those pegs are the only thing really supporting this blade. So is the blade much straighter than on the original? There's no blade plate? Yeah, I mean, you could say that, but it doesn't feel the sturdiest. The back of the original CEO, when you open it, that's a solid chunk of metal in there, okay? The blade might be a little crooked. There might be a little bit of blade play in there, but it always felt very sturdy. I don't feel that way when I'm holding this one. So this is very pretty, but it is a glorified letter opener. It's fine for my everyday needs in terms of going to an office and dealing with office needs. It still very much fits the bill of a CEO's blade or an office worker's knife. But there are things that I do all the time with this knife that I just would never attempt with this one. I'm afraid this one would snap on me. It would either snap right here in the joint, or the blade itself is very spindly and thin. It would just, I'm afraid it would snap. If you look at the back of this skinny little blade and you look at this knife, you can tell, especially looking at the base of the original CEO, This one is ever so slightly heftier. And yes, it's ever so slight, but it makes a difference. Um, Overall, it's this is by far the better knife. Uh, this one over here. This is a better knife than the flipper. So I love the flipper. I'm happy that the company listened, but I have to say, unless you are somebody who is left-handed, um, the original is still the one for me. The original is still the one that I would buy. Um, and it's the one that was designed by Richard Rogers, the guy who really designed this knife. So there you have it. Between the old-fashioned original Cricut CEO and the newer flipper, I'll put this right here. The original knife, this one right here, is definitely the one I would choose. This is the one that's going to hold up. This is the one that's going to last. This one, wonderful construction, wonderful to use. It's going to break.